stood alone every November 10th. Same spot, same boots, same silence. Locals thought he was just some stubborn old man, maybe crazy, maybe grieving. But this year, just after sunrise, engines echoed across the valley. 20 vehicles, flags, Marines. One by one they parked and stood beside him. No words, no orders, and the town finally asked who was this man that made an entire convoy cross 3 states in his honor. If you believe loyalty never expires even after discharge, share your thoughts in the comments. Mill Creek was the kind of town most people drove through not to. One stoplight, one diner, one memorial stone in a square, barely large enough to deserve the name. Nothing remarkable except for Samuel Hart. At 81, Samuel moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd spent a lifetime conserving motion. White hair cut high and tight back, ramrod straight. Despite his years, he lived alone in a modest house at the end of Sycamore Street. His neighbors knew little about him beyond polite nods exchanged over mailboxes. But every year on November 10th, Samuel changed before dawn while the town still slept. He would transform. His threadbare civilian clothes gave way to a meticulously maintained Marine dress uniform. Every brass button polished, every crease. Knife-sharp combat ribbons and medals aligned with mathematical precision across his chest. Then, as first light broke over the eastern ridge, Samuel would take his position beside the memorial stone in the town square, cap tucked precisely under one arm, eyes forward, expression unreadable, and he would stand for hours without shifting, speaking or acknowledging passers-by. Rain soaked him in 09, snow dusted his shoulders in 15, a heat wave in 18 left sweat trickling down his temple, but his posture never wavered. "Morning, Mr. Hart," Mayor Whitfield would call each year, receiving only a slight nod in return. "Old man's like a statue," teenagers whispered, occasionally mimicking his stance with exaggerated rigidity until boredom drove them elsewhere. "Just grief," speculated Linda at the diner. "Lost someone in a war, probably." No one really knew. No one really asked. Samuel's annual vigil became just another Mill Creek peculiarity, like the courthouse clock that always ran 3 minutes fast, or the abandoned mill that supposedly housed ghosts inside Walter's Spartan home. Clues to his ritual remained private. A yellowed roster from 1968 framed on his bedroom wall, names in neat columns, some crossed out, some with small stars beside them. A collection of folded flags displayed in triangular cases. Photos of young men in jungle fatigues, arms slung around each other's shoulders, faces squinting against tropical sun, and one photo larger than the rest. Samuel, decades younger but recognizable, standing beside 7 Marines outside a field hospital. The back bore a simple inscription in fading ink: Echo Company, Kaysan, November 9, 1968. The man beside Samuel in the photo, a lanky redhead with a crooked smile, had died the next day, November 10th. They'd been pinned down outside a village whose name didn't appear on any map. Samuel had carried him 2 miles through jungle, only to watch him bleed out at the evacuation point. That's why Samuel stood each year, not for recognition, not for himself, but because he'd made a promise as the light faded from his friend's eyes. "I won't let them forget you." So he stood year after year alone in a town that barely noticed, honoring not just one fallen Marine, but all those whose names on the roster bore the small, solemn stars of sacrifice. Jenna Ruiz had been at the Mill Creek Gazette for exactly 6 weeks when she spotted Samuel during her morning coffee run. She almost walked past him, just another local oddity, but something in his stillness caught her journalistic instinct. "Excuse me, sir," she approached, notepad ready. "I'm from the Gazette. I'm doing a piece on local traditions." And Samuel's eyes remained fixed forward, offering nothing but a slight nod, acknowledging her presence. "Could I ask why you're standing here today?" She tried again. Silence. "Is this related to Veterans Day tomorrow?" Another slight nod, nothing more. Melissa left her card at his feet and continued to the office. Curiosity piqued. Her editor, Jim Barnes, Mill Creek native for 63 years, just shrugged when she asked about Samuel. "Does it every year, Marine Corps birthday, November 10th. Been doing it since before I took over the paper." "But why? What's his story?" "Never gave one. Never asked for one to be told." That afternoon, Melissa returned to the square. Samuel remained seemingly unmoved since morning. She snapped a discreet photo, then visited the county records office. Samuel T. Hart, born 1943, enlisted, United States Marine Corps, 1966. Served in Vietnam, honorably discharged, 1970. Moved to Mill Creek, 1979. No criminal record, nothing remarkable, at least on paper. The next day, she knocked on his door. He answered in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt. The stoic sentinel from the square, transformed into an ordinary old man. "Mr. Hart, I'm the reporter." His voice was a gravelly rumble, unused to conversation. Nothing to report. Before she could respond, he gestured to a framed roster visible in his living room. Everything that matters is there. The door closed, gently but firmly. Not rude, just finished. Over the next week, Melissa's journalist tenacity took over. She photographed the roster through Samuel's window, deciphered the fading names, and began tracking down surviving members of Echo Company. Most numbers were disconnected, most letters returned, but one email found its target. Gunnery Sergeant Andre Baylor, retired, now living outside San Antonio. Samuel Hart. Hill's voice crackled over the phone when she called. You found Walt? A pause. He's still doing the vigil every year apparently, Melissa confirmed. Can you tell me why, Wasem? Hill's exhale was heavy with memory. Because Samuel Hart was the reason any of us made it home. The story tumbled out in ambush near K-San Echo Company, pinned down radio operator, killed in the first volley. No way to call for extraction. Samuel, then a corporal, had moved from man to man, dragging the wounded to whatever cover he could find. Killed 3 enemy soldiers with his sidearm while carrying a Marine twice his size. When ammunition ran low, he'd used a fallen soldier's belt as a tourniquet, his own shirt as bandages. He saved 7 men that day. Hill recounted, carried Kyle Jensen for miles, but Jack didn't make it, died on November 10th, the Marine Corps birthday. Walt took it hard, blamed himself. So he stands for Jack, Melissa asked. He stands for all of them, Hill corrected, the ones who didn't come back. That evening, Hill shared Samuel's story in Echo Company's private online group. Within hours, the threat exploded. Wait, Walt's still alive, still doing the vigil. I named my son after him, never told him. My dad said Samuel Hart was the bravest man he ever met. I owe my life to that man. Photos appeared, old letters, medal citations never claimed, stories of Samuel visiting families of fallen Marines, delivering personal effects, then disappearing before they could properly thank him. Then came the coordination. I'm driving from Tucson, flying into Nashville, need a ride to Mill Creek. Can loan my truck if anyone needs. Let's do this right. Full dress, silent tribute. The plan came together with military precision. Routes mapped, assembly points designated, arrival times synchronized. Meanwhile in Mill Creek, Samuel prepared as he always did. Uniform pressed, shoes shined to mirror finish, dog tags cleaned. He slept dreamlessly the night of November 9th, unaware of the convoy already moving through darkness toward his small town. At 5:30 a.m., November 10th, Samuel took his position at the memorial stone. Alone as I see, always at 5:57 a.m., the first rumble of engines carried across the valley, headlights cut through early morning fog. Samuel remained at attention, eyes forward as the first vehicle parked at the square's edge. 3 Marines emerged in full dress uniform. Without a word, they took positions beside him. Then another vehicle arrived, then another by 6:15 a.m. 20 vehicles encircled the square, 43 Marines, some gray-haired, some young enough to be Samuel's grandchildren, stood in perfect formation. No commands were called, no explanations offered, just silent tribute to the man who had once stood for them. If you believe time can never break, a Marine's promise, share your respect. Mill Creek woke to an unprecedented sight. The morning commuters stopped, first cars pulling haphazardly to curbs, drivers emerging with coffee cups forgotten in their hands. Then came the curious, drawn by texts and calls. Something's happening in the square. By 6:30 a.m., a crowd had gathered, maintaining a respectful distance from the formation of Marines. Children whispered questions. Adults hushed them gently. Mayor Whitfield arrived, speech hastily scribbled on note cards, the town's standard response to any unexpected gather. One look at the silent assembly made him tuck the cards away. Some moments transcend official remarks. Dad, who is that old man in the middle? 10-year-old Tyler Jenkins asked, pointing at Samuel. Mark Jenkins, who had passed Samuel 100 times without really seeing him, suddenly felt the weight of his ignorance. That's a Marine, he answered quietly, the kind they don't make anymore. Jenna Ruiz arrived with her camera, but found herself hesitating to raise. This felt less like news, and more like something sacred. Finally she began a quiet live stream, her narration minimal and reverent. I'm here in Mill Creek Square, where dozens of Marines have gathered around Samuel Hart, a Vietnam veteran, who has stood vigil here every November 10th for decades. No one organized this, no one advertised it, they just came. The live stream counter ticked upward. 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. Comments flowed faster than anyone could read. That's what honor looks like. My dad served with Hart in 60. I'm in tears watching this. Semper Fi, devil dog. We remember. A teacher in Chicago discovered the feed and displayed it on her classroom smartboard. 30 students watched in silence as she explained, this is what commitment means. This is what we mean by never leave anyone behind. Gone. Throughout it all, Samuel remained motionless at the center of the formation. Only once did his composure shift, a moment when he closed his eyes for one long second, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. At precisely 700 a.m., without verbal command, every Marine present rendered a perfect salute. They held it for a full minute, then turned in unison and returned to their vehicles. Just as silently as they had arrived, they departed, leaving Samuel alone at the memorial once more. But something had fundamentally changed. The town no longer saw a peculiar old man. They saw a hero whose quiet dignity had summoned warriors across thousands of miles. By noon, the national news had picked up the story. Veterans organizations shared the video. Military blogs pieced together Samuel's service record, and the full scope of his bravery emerged. That afternoon, as Samuel returned home, he found his usually empty porch covered with tokens of appreciation, flowers, cards, small American flags. One item stood out, a hand-drawn card in childish script that read simply, "Thank you for standing." Samuel collected it carefully and carried it inside, placing it on his mantle beside the Echo Company roster. The phone began ringing. Samuel didn't answer. His doorbell chimed repeatedly as reporters sought interviews. Samuel remained inside, silent as ever. But Jenna Ruiz, who had started it all, received an unexpected text message from an unknown number. "Square Sunset, just you." When she arrived, Samuel sat alone on a bench, watching the last light fade beyond the hills. "You told them," he said simply, not accusatory, just factual. "They deserve to know," she replied. "The town, the country, all of us." Samuel nodded slowly. "Jack died today, 55 years ago today." "I know." Last thing he said to me was, "Don't let them forget us, Walt." "Not him, us." They sat in silence as darkness settled over Mill Creek. Finally, Samuel spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Thank you." Melissa understood. He wasn't thanking her for the article or the attention. He was thanking her for ensuring the promise he'd made to a dying friend had been fulfilled. They would not be forgotten. In the days that followed, letters arrived by the hundreds. Samuel read each one, though he replied to few. The Marine Corps commandant sent a personal note. The Secretary of the Navy wrote to acknowledge Samuel's extraordinary service. A retired general called the mayor, offering to fund a proper memorial in the square. The town council unanimously approved. Samuel accepted it all with the same quiet dignity with which he'd stood his solitary vigil for decades. He never sought the spotlight, but his silent example now illuminated lives across the country. The year passed, seasons turned. Samuel's daily routine remained largely unchanged. Coffee at dawn, newspaper on the porch, occasional trips to the hardware store, but subtle differences emerged. Neighbors no longer simply nodded. They stopped to chat. Veterans passing through town made pilgrimages to his door. Scout troops wrote letters. Samuel adapted to attention the same way he'd adapted to being ignored, with stoic grace. He answered questions when asked directly. He shook hands when offered, but he never elaborated beyond necessity, never claimed credit, never sought praise. Melissa's article won a regional journalism award. The framed certificate now hung in the Gazette office. Though she'd offered it to Samuel first, he declined with a gentle, "That's your honor, not mine." As November approached, speculation mounted about whether the Marines would return. Samuel made no comment when asked. He simply continued his preparations as he had for 55 years. The uniform was laid out, the shoes polished, the memories honored in private. Dawn broke cold and clear on November 10th. Samuel arrived at the square, 15 minutes earlier than usual, 15 a.m., and found he wasn't the first. 3 Marines already stood at the memorial, stone breath fogging in the chill air. More arrived every few minutes. By 5:45, the formation was twice the size of the previous year. Word had spread, the promise had expanded. Samuel took his position at the center without acknowledgement or fanfare. The Marines adjusted their formation around him, not a word exchanged, not a command given, just the silent precision of shared purpose. As sunlight spilled across the square illuminating the assembled warriors, Samuel noticed something new, a bronze plaque installed at the base of the memorial stone. He hadn't been consulted about it, hadn't been told. The inscription read simply, "For those who stood when no one was watching." Samuel's eyes lingered on it for a moment, then he resumed his vigilant forward gaze. By 7 a.m., the crowd of observers had swelled beyond anything Mill Creek had witnessed before. Veterans, from every branch, families with children, elderly couples with hands clasped in remembrance. As the Marines rendered their salute, Samuel, for the first time in 55 years, broke protocol. He returned the salute, acknowledging not just the fallen, but those who had come to stand with him. One by one, the Marines departed, each passing Samuel with a nod of profound respect. The last to leave, a young corporal with earnest eyes, paused briefly. "See you next year, sir?" he asked quietly. Samuel nodded once, until I can't. After all had gone, Samuel remained a few minutes longer. He reached out and touched the new plaque fingers, tracing the letters with reverence. Then he stepped back, straightened his already perfect posture, and turned toward home. His silhouette cut a sharp edge against the morning light, a solitary figure once more, but carrying with him the invisible presence of brothers across time and distance. Not alone anymore, not ever again. Subscribe to Samuel Hart Stories if you believe true loyalty doesn't end with service.